So Lilith just announced their new Cav Commander Belisarius Prime. It is official. It is on the Instagram page, the official Instagram page for Lilith and Rise of Kingdoms. So I can go over and give you a brief skill overview as well as some implications for where this commander might end up in the future. Does he belong in your lineup? Does he not? And why is the reception to him kind of so mixed? Well, we're going to break it all down. So let's hop into it. Alright, so the very first thing that we're going to go over is his talent trees. So right off the bat, nothing really jumps out at you. It's Cavalry, okay, obviously. Versatility, which is dog doo-doo, and we have mobility, which generally is what you use to go gather your runes in KVK. So not entirely super excited. This does give him some implications for like Arc of Osiris, I guess, and well, yeah, just getting your runes. No, I'm kidding. This guy obviously has more use than that. You can put him as a secondary commander to any other meta cav pairing, and he will probably be successful. But let's hop into his first skill. So his first skill is called Custodian of the Empire. It is a 1000 rage requirement, pretty baseline nowadays. Damage factor 2400. Also pretty baseline nowadays, but it does provide a debuff, and this is where this commander and this active skill actually start to really shine. They lose about 100 rage over 2 seconds. That's good. That means you're making the opponent take about one more turn to get their active skill off, right? That 100 rage mark is generally one turn, maybe a little bit less. But the real kicker is when the target is surrounded, they inflict a deception effect, which basically requires them to gain 200 more rage to fire off their active skill. You can think of this kind of like a silence, right? If you think that the Epic Herman, I guess, is good if you're in the early game, or Guan Yu is good if you're in the late game, then you should also think that this active skill is really, really strong. I think that when you are targeting something and this effect makes it so that they cannot fire off their active skill, you have done a really, really good job of nullifying the target. So this will be really good when using this commander to swarm. This will be really good if you're hitting something and they're hitting you back with multiple marches, right? You can think of the scenario as open field when you're just like in this gigantic, massive Imperium ball, and you just are running all your marches to sad face, you're getting hit, you're hitting back, it doesn't really matter. Or you're doing like general 5v5s, and you're a more aggressive player, this skill shines a little bit more. Where this doesn't shine, and this kind of gets into the commander breakdown later in the video, is that the skill really does nothing if they're not hitting you back. So a very common way that people fight in Rise of Kingdoms is they target somebody who's not targeting them. When they get targeted, they run away. I get it. Sometimes that's, shunned or frowned upon, but generally for open field trades, that is how it works. When you're not fighting for objectives, this skill realistically won't do anything. And I think that is disappointing to a lot of people, but let's get into the next skill, which is Press the Advantage. This is the callback to the Epic Belisarius, and if we hop over in game here, I think the Epic Belly has a skill. Is it his expertise skill? I can't really remember. Yeah, so this commander gains defense, and their troop gains 50% march speed for 10 seconds whenever it exits combat. So if we hop back into the Press the Advantage skill, we see that they give it a little, 10% more speed, I suppose, and half the duration. But regardless, 60% march speed is a lot. On top of 20% march speed, this commander will be flying around the battlefield really, really quickly. So all hail rune marches, and all hail this commander in Arc of Osiris, where it will probably be paired with Honda or Julius Caesar for kind of like that maximum amount of tankiness and speed. Next up, we have To the Last Man. This cavalry units gain 25% defense. That's fine. Okay, decent enough stats. And then it's got like a really low instant proc damage factor. It's 10% with a 5-second cooldown, and it's only 500 damage factor. So this skill is a little disappointing, and I think this is where we can start to see why people are not super happy with these skills, because so far, the first one, Press the Advantage, so I guess the second skill is very march speed oriented, and when you're hitting stuff in combat, you care about march speed, don't get me wrong. March speed is one of the most underrated stats in Rise of Kingdoms, but once you're already connecting, you're connecting, and once you've exited combat, you're usually running away. So that 60% march speed generally doesn't do anything. So really, that first skill reads 30% attack and 20% march speed, which is pretty underwhelming. And then this next one is just 25% defense and a low instant proc damage factor, so also kind of underwhelming. Next up, we have his fourth skill, which is Pacification of Nika. And this is another skill that just like doesn't do enough for me. This commander's troops take 10% less skill damage. That's not much at all, especially in the meta of smite damage. And they have a conditional skill damage increase here. So if they are hitting another troop on the map and that target troop has less than 80% units remaining, this commander deals 30% more skill damage. So why is it 80% and not just deal 30% more skill damage? I'm not sure. Another thing to note is I see a lot of people saying, okay, well, Justinian can pair with this guy for rallies. I actually don't think so, because this skill requires them to be hitting another troop on the map. So they would essentially be losing 30% more skill damage while hitting a rally, or not a rally, but a garrison. Swarm everything you want, that's great. But I think that, yeah, this will not do so well as a rally commander. And then the last one, this is the expertise skill. It's called Roman Devotion. And there's been a little bit of drama behind this skill. Basically, there's a 3-troop, 4-troop, and 5-troop debuff that it inflicts. And once you get to that troop count, then it'll inflict that amount of damage debuff on the target. So 6, 9, and 12% respectively. I did talk to VIP support because there was a little bit of a rumor floating around that said, oh, well, this actually doesn't inflict as a debuff. It instead inflict like just for the Belisarius March. I have debunked that. That is not true. It is a 12% all damage debuff that it does inflict. So this skill itself is actually very, very strong. And before we get into the commander pairings that I think that it's going to go well with, before we get into the open field implications, I do want to go over a few quick points as to why this commander might be better than you are thinking and why it might be worse than you're thinking and or underwhelming. So a few points to highlight kind of why he's getting so much hate here. And yes, I do have a little notepad in front of me. Basically, I think that there were a lot of expectations on this release. It has been like 1 or 2 weeks longer than we normally have to wait for a new cavalry commander or a new commander in general. Like, I think we're going on the 6th or 5th. I think it's the 5th or 6th MGE cycle since the release of the last one, which was a leadership commander, which nobody uses really. You know, I mean, it's Siege, sure, you can do whatever, but most people did not invest in them. And then Lapu Lapu was kind of underwhelming. And I think that a lot of people thought that he was going to be AoE. I think baseline, they had a Huo last time with Justinian. I think that they had the Nevsky release. Obviously, the Joan of Arc was great, but generally you flip-flop back and forth. And the Archers just recently got 2 AoE commanders, which leads me into my next point, and the power level of the commanders between Zhuge Liang, Hermann Prime, and then we had Liu Che. All the most recent releases have been absolutely insane. And yes, Joan of Arc is very, very strong for Cavs. Nevsky is very good. Huo is very good. None of them are quite on that level of just like, oh my god, this commander is going to be relevant in the game for probably until the game dies. Like, I don't see Liu Che ever being bad in Rise of Kingdoms. I don't see Hermann or Zhuge Liang like ever getting benched within the next maybe 4 years. Like, they are so crazy strong. And this commander just does not live up to that expectation. Lastly, like, it's just boring. And I mean, we can go through the skills again, but if you compare him, and let's not go through the skills. In fact, let's just compare him to Huo real quick, right? Like, they do almost the same thing. They are both single target, okay? They're both amplifiers, so they both increase the skill damage. And that's it. Like, they're both just single damage nuke amplifiers. That's it. And guess what Nevsky was? A single damage nuke amplifier. It's the exact same commander that they've already released twice, and so people just are not excited. I think personally, and this is where we can go into what like this commander actually is and how good this commander actually is, I think this commander is nearing like Nevsky power level, is nearing Huo power level. But its stats are just a little lackluster. And truthfully, what had to happen is it had to surpass William. And this is where it's like a pro and a con. William is very, very strong. So what this commander needed to be is this had to be the William replacement. This commander's active skill, right, the new one, Belisarius Prime, should have read something like this. It should have said 3 target fan-shaped AoE, targets hit by this, skill cannot benefit from active or from buffs that increase skill damage for the next 5 seconds. If you had that on this commander, on Belisarius, right, it would automatically be an instant meta hit, right? People would feel less bad about replacing their William, right? Because people like their William. They know it's a really good commander. I mean, hell, I would seriously consider keeping my William in my murder ball before I got rid of my Huo. I'm saying it now, okay? Like, Huo brings us slow, and that's it, right? Like, Huo is a very selfish March. He trades very well, don't get me wrong. But, like, Nevsky, I wouldn't replace because this debuff is way too strong. The skill damage makes him so versatile, it's crazy. And he's tanky. He can be used with pretty much everyone. Joan of Arc is crazy. Obviously, there's just so much damage involved. Huo is just a very selfish commander, which is fine. He trades well, but he's not going to do much for my ball. William does so much for your ball. It's absurd, right? You've got more instant proc damage than Belisarius. You have a fantastic debuff that only gets stronger as more commanders come out in the game with skill damage amplifiers, right? So Belisarius, for example, increases skill damage done by 30%. It's just William counters it. It's just better than, right? So the commander needed to be William 2.0, and it just isn't. Now, that is a positive, right? On one of the positive sides, you can think, okay, well, I can keep my William, and my William is obviously a very strong commander, and that's awesome. But I will also point out, if we go back into the skills here, and we do compare it to something like Nevsky and Huo, I was saying how similar they are. Guys, I mean, this commander is great. The commander itself is probably very good. As a third Cav March option, I mean, this commander is probably on a very similar level as Huo. It's probably on a very similar level as Nevsky. It's just not better. It doesn't take that step forward. And I think that's what's missing from this commander. That being said, if we go and swap into potential pairings, I think that your number one pairing probably going to be something like Joan of Arc. Just because I think Joan of Arc is the best Cav commander of the game for open field. The double 2000 nuke is just crazy, and you buff, and it's really good. Nevsky and Huo will also be viable pairings. Now, I think that Huo will probably do more for you as a singular march, right? But in a murder ball, I would definitely bring Nevsky because the debuff is just too powerful, and the versatility of Nevsky is just really, really good. That being said, if you are looking at this commander as a third Cav option, right? So you're not pairing with Nevsky, Joan, or Huo, or William, right? So you're leaving your main two, you're using Nevsky, Joan, and Huo with William, or you're doing some variation of that with like Huo, Joan, and Nevsky, William, whatever you're doing, right? Then I would say that maybe the best pair for this commander is actually XY. XY brings the AoE. It'll keep, Belisarius in combat. It's got like a little bit of a debuff, and at the same time, the reduced rage cycle is nice for that debuff from Belisarius to get onto your target sooner. That being said, you can pair with Justinian. Generally, I try not to actually pair commanders like single target paired with single target. The exception to that is Huo, because he benefits so much from dropping combat and getting into combat again. But generally, like, Justinian isn't that great for me. Like, Justinian pretty much does what, what's his name, Minamoto does, just like a little bit better, a little more tanky, but like the debuff isn't even as good. Anyway, I would probably run, like, I will eventually be running a 7 March combo with 3 Cavs. I currently don't have the gear for that, right? But if I did have the gear for that, my 7th March at this current moment in time would be XY with Belisarius. So just to recap, I think the everything else, right? The Guan skip, the Gorgo Liu or Liu Che with Alex, that stays the same. Obviously, the archers stay the same, and then the Cav remain Nevsky with Joan. It goes Huo with William, and then it goes XY most likely paired with the new Belisarius. And lastly, just to throw this in there, because I think that the only people realistically as of now that should invest in this commander, unless something changes pretty heavily in the future, are large whales who should be swarming stuff. And this is where I'm actually going to link above my swarm guide. I laid out the very best marches to swarm in a 5, 6, and 7 march setup. And basically this commander should be an automatic include into your swarm team. The debuff that increases all damage taken by the target by 12% permanently is absolutely fantastic, increasing the amount of rage that the garrison needs in order to actually fire off its active skill is fantastic. Now, I did say that that one skill for 30% boost to damage won't apply, but that is okay. That being said, what gets replaced in the swarm setup here? So originally we had Nevsky with Justinian and Huo with Minamoto as the two cavs you were bringing in the 5, 6, and 7 march setup. Actually, you should only bring those in the 6 and 7 march setup originally, but now that's changed a little bit. And so now we can actually swap the pairings a little bit. We can have Nevsky primary and Justinian primary, and we can pair those respectively with Mina and with the new Cav commander Belisarius. Now, you're probably thinking, wow, you're benching Huo? Yes. For the swarm team specifically, I have had very poor experiences swarming with Huo. That is partially because this skill, his fourth skill, does not work when hitting a garrison. So you are losing 35% defense and 25% more skill damage. That is also part of his expertise. So you're essentially only getting 3 skills when you're swarming with Huo. Now, I have not tested this specifically. There is still a chance that the Minamoto is outclassed by the Huo. But with the double relic and the debuff provided by Minamoto's 3rd or 4th skill, I think he's just a little too strong not to include. So I think that Minamoto is perfectly fine. If Huo ends up being better, then it'll end up being something like Nevsky and Justinian paired with Huo and Belisarius. But if the Minamoto is actually a little bit better in your testing, then you can go something like Nevsky and Belisarius and Justinian and Minamoto. Something along those lines becomes your ideal swarming setup. All right, that about wraps up my whole thoughts on Belisarius, as well as any future implications that he might have on our meta, how he affects the swarm team, why I think the conversations surrounding him have been a little give or take. You know, some people like him, most people don't. But I think that a lot of people are disappointed, and I hope that I got that point across when I was explaining why he's really just the same commander as Nevsky and Huo. So anyway, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I will gladly review all those comments and provide any commentary and feedback that I can to you guys, and any questions that you might have regarding the new commander. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys again in the next one. Peace.